How fat loss actually works. This has to be one of the most commonly asked questions in the health and fitness industry. And this isn't the surface level shit that you get, calories in, calories out, which, although is true, it is an incredibly oversimplified way of looking at things. So, what we're going to do today, we're going to get a little nerdy. We're going to get a little deep onto the chemical mechanisms behind fat loss. But I'm going to keep it simple because otherwise it can get really fucking boring, to be honest with you. Before we start, why should you listen to me? Well, the truth is, you don't have to. I'm not your dad. Do whatever the fuck you want. But if you want an actual deep understanding of how these things work and how to actually implement them, which is the most important thing, like you're not here just to be able to be educated. You are here to be able to understand how does this actually impact and benefit my life. I have done over 25,000 hours of one-to-one personal training. That's not just group training. Otherwise, it would exceed much more than that number. The actual one-to-one of the last 15 years of helping people transform their lives. Everything from training for photo shoots, training for bodybuilding and fitness and physique shows in the bodybuilding world, everything from training professional athletes and Gen Pop. Gen Pop predominantly, as most people don't fit in the athlete bracket. Even the people that get on stage in the bodybuilding world, I still consider part of the Gen Pop unless they're going to Olympia and the Arnolds and things of that nature. I have been a professional athlete for 3 years. That's professional rugby league. Done a multitude of things. I've worked with some of the smartest, best people in the world in terms of health, fitness, lifestyle, nutrition, mindset. So I'm going to share all my knowledge and expertise and condense that down, especially as it relates to fat loss. Now, specifically, what we're going to be looking at here is chemical mechanisms. We're going to look at training, diet, and recovery. We've got some stuff to go through. We've got some stuff. So we're going to be going through all of this. These are things I've just been nutting out, trying to keep things as simple as possible, as it does get really complex. And if you don't have a deep understanding of adipocytes and how the Krebs cycle works and mitochondria and organelles, it gets really fucking overwhelming. It gets really overwhelming. Unless you're into that stuff, you're nerdy, like I am. But what we're going to do here is we're going to break things down. So what I'd love to start with is just understanding chemical mechanisms, how fat loss actually works. How is fat burned? Where the fuck does it go? At one point, you've got this stored energy. Where does it go? So fat, in a sense, to simplify things, fat is stored triglycerides inside adipocytes. Essentially, it's stored energy. Triglycerides being energy, fat inside a fat cell. That's how you can imagine it. That's all fat is. It is anthropologically designed to, or biologically designed to store energy for if we go through a famine, we've got no access to food, we've still got some kind of energy. Okay. That's all fat is in its most simplistic form. Now, the way fat loss works really is in two different ways. There is lipolysis and there is oxidation. Don't worry, I'm going to go through these and make it really, really simple. Lipolysis, and I'm going to be going through this because this is my simplified version of this. Essentially, when we enter a calorie deficit, two things are going to be secreted. We've got hormone-sensitive lipase and adipose triglyceride lipase. What these do, these signals, or these hormones, they basically go into the fat cell and they break down triglycerides, okay, which is the fat energy stored inside the fat cell. They break that down into free fatty acids and into glycerol, okay? Those then will enter the bloodstream. So when we're in a calorie deficit, we require energy at some point. Body will secrete certain hormones and say, hey, I need more energy, go get it. And it will go into the fat cell, break down the triglyceride, and it'll enter the bloodstream for the body to do something with it, right? It is triggered by energy demands. We mentioned calorie deficit before. You have to be in some kind of calorie deficit in order to be able to signal to the body, I need extra energy. Essentially, what we're trying to do in a calorie deficit is we are trying to almost mal-energize the body. We're trying to say, hey, I don't want you consuming enough energy so that you need to go and find it elsewhere. I.e., we're going to go into our energy stores because we don't have enough. Think about if you are in there's a zombie apocalypse You only have a limited amount of food. You're out there fighting zombies, and you're like, we can't access any more food because the zombies are fucking eating everything. And if we go out there, they're going to fuck us up. What do we do? Because I still need energy to perform my energy demands, i.e., fighting zombies in this case. So where do I go? I go in the cellar and I get the tin of baked beans. That's my reserves. Okay. I just made that up. I hope that makes sense. Once the free fatty acids and glycerol have entered the bloodstream, fat loss only occurs if those fatty acids are being oxidized, if something is done with them. Otherwise, what will happen is it will go through the bloodstream and it will be restored because body can't just have the energy just sitting there, just wasting away. So what will basically happen through oxidation, and this is where things can get a little bit complex. So I'm going to make sure that I go through this in a very simplistic format. Once free fatty acids enter the bloodstream, they're going to be transported to really one of two places, either going to be to the muscle or it's going to be to the liver, depending on what the body needs. It's going to say, hey, I need more here to my muscle tissues to perform certain activities, or I need it here in the liver. Okay, so that's really where it's going to go. The way it does that is it will enter the mitochondria, which the mitochondria, very simplistically, is the powerhouse of the cell. It's where shit starts happening. It's like the nucleus, not nucleus, but it's the powerhouse of the cell. It's the nuclear power plant of where stuff starts to happen, okay? And that'll happen via something we call the carnitine shuttle. Now, pay attention with this a little bit. This is where things are going to get a little bit complex, but this is the simplified or the oversimplified version. What it will essentially do after it goes into the mitochondria by the carnitine shuttle, it will undergo something called beta oxidation, which very, very simply is the metabolic process of breaking down fat. So it's gone in, beta oxidation starts to break that fat down in order to be able to do something with that. What it will be done, it will be converted into something called acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA will then transport carbon atoms into what we call the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle you might have heard of, okay? The Krebs cycle, essentially what it does is it oxidizes acetyl-CoA, utilizes it, does stuff with acetyl-CoA to make energy. And that energy is what we call ATP production. Now, ATP is our body's preferred source of energy, and it stands for adenosine triphosphate. The byproducts of that, so we've gone through all this process, essentially, we'll go down in a step-by-step manner. We're in a calorie deficit. Our energy demands, let's use our zombie apocalypse example. So we are in a state of feast or famine. We have a bunch of stored foods and goods in the cellar. We're in a cabin in the middle of the woods. Zombies are surrounding us. We're out there with a pickaxe and we're chopping down zombies. This is obviously going to exert energy. We can't go out and search for food because there is no food. Zombies have eaten all the shit up. So they're trying to get to us to get our tin of baked beans in the cellar. So what will happen is that we will fight all the zombies. We need energy to continue fighting zombies and to survive. So we will then go into our reserves, and our reserves are stored in the cellar. And that is going to be our tin of baked beans and Spam. I don't know who the fuck eats Spam, but it's vile. Okay, so Spam lovers out there, you're gross. So we'll go into the cellar and we will consume whatever we need to consume. Okay. In order for that to be able to occur, lipolysis must occur. Body will do a bunch of things. It will secrete hormone-sensitive lipase and adipose triglyceride lipase to break down or break the tin open of those baked beans or the stored energy, and it'll take out the free fatty acids and the glycerol. And essentially, once we consume them, we will start to have some kind of energy. Okay. After that oxidation process has occurred, free fatty acids enter the bloodstream. It goes through beta oxidation, that whole process into converting stored energy into actual usable energy. ATP production occurs. After we've used the energy, the byproduct at the end of the fat loss kind of cycle, if you will, is carbon dioxide, i.e., you literally exhale it, or H2O, basically urine, sweat, or breath, which is the exhaling part of things. That's the end of the fat loss phase. Imagine a car, combustion engine, so not an electric car. You've put fuel in, it's gone through all its chemical processes that it needs to be able to move, i.e., that's what a car does, transport something from A to B. And then the excess is kind of everything that comes out your exhaust. That's the stuff that comes out your exhaust. That is how fat loss works from a chemical level. I hope that makes sense. Now, what we really care about is what the fuck do we do with that? Because even though you know all the chemical formulas in the world, what do we do with it? Like, what are we actually supposed to do with all this? Three different areas that we're going to go through. The first is going to be diet. And the reason why we're going to go to diet is this has the biggest impact on fat loss because it's literally consuming calories. And all calories are, very simply, is a unit of energy. That's all it is. Okay. It's no more complex than that. So if we say, I need to pay attention to my diet, here are a couple of things that we're going to pay attention to. And here are a couple of the practical kind of takeaways for you guys. So if fat loss really does require, we briefly mentioned it, is that energy expenditure must surpass energy intake. It must. There is no if, buts, or maybes. If you are not losing body weight or body mass, or you are not losing body fat, then you are not in a calorie deficit. You are not in a calorie deficit. And you can try to justify that in any way that you want, but it isn't fucking right. And what you care about is not the, hey, let's stroke my ego or let's stroke my justification. When you're trying to get a result, whether you're doing it by yourself or you're paying a coach for it, the result is the most important thing. And if you don't get a result, you're going to be really fucking pissed that you've spent your money and your time and your effort. So sometimes when you're a coach, you have to be a little bit cruel to be kind. And cruel, I don't mean by being a drill sergeant and being an absolute dick. It basically means you need to have the brutal and honest truth because that's what you're paying for at the end of the day. If you can't do it by yourself, what you are paying for is the implementation and the accountability of sticking to the fucking plan. And you aren't always going to want to do it. And you're going to want to do things that you might have done in the past that's gotten you to a state where you are overweight or you want to just lose some body fat. Hormones certainly influence your ability to lose fat. They certainly influence it. And mainly that influence is going to come from two hormones predominantly being leptin and ghrelin, okay, which are your hunger and satiety hormones. Ghrelin is your hunger hormone. When you need to consume foods, ghrelin increases, you get that feeling of hunger. And when you don't need to, it starts to reduce. And leptin has an effect directly with that because leptin is your satiety hormones, which does come from your fat cells. It's like, I've had enough here. I don't need any more. The tank is full. We need to just cut this off, okay? So hunger is going to be influenced hormonally. NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, just how much you move. This is classified as NEAT, me just doing this. It's not intentional exercise. I'm not intentionally moving my arms. I just am. So NEAT is going to be influenced, and also water retention and a few other things. But here's kind of the kicker here. Hormones influence how fat loss works, but it does not override thermodynamics. It does not override thermodynamics. Even with hormones influencing, you can still lose body fat. When you're looking at women, for example, that are postmenopausal, or you're looking at men and women in their 60s, 70s, 80s, fat loss can still occur. Fat loss can still occur, which means that hormonally, it's not going to override things. It's not a big, hey, you can't achieve results now because my hormones are out of whack. Even during menstrual cycle, depending on what phase you are, whether it's the follicular or the luteal phase, you're going to increase the demand of your body wants to store water throughout that particular phase. You're going to increase the demand of energy expenditure throughout that period of time. You might be hungrier throughout that period of time, but fat loss can still occur throughout that period of time. The biggest contributor to a calorie or an energy deficit is your diet. If you cannot control what you put in your mouth, let's keep it PG here, then you cannot lose body fat. And that's the simple and the harsh truth of things. And it's also the fucking hardest thing, especially if you've got emotional eating disorders, especially if you've got habits or behaviors of stuffing your face or binge eating. It's really fucking hard, especially in Western society. We've got access to things on a dime. I can pick up my phone and be like, let's go. Uber Eats. Let's make it happen. I want food right now. I want it yesterday. And it's going to happen really quickly. Whereas once upon a time, we would have to go, I'm hungry. I need to go out and find an animal or find some berries or find some vegetables or find whatever it is. And I need to literally farm it. I need to hunt it. I need to kill it. I need to farm it. I need to do whatever I need to do in order to be able to eat. That's why people get a little bit lost in intermittent fasting as well. It's like, oh, we weren't supposed to eat 3 meals a day, 5 meals a day, 7 meals a day, whatever it is. It's like, yes and no, but really it's because we couldn't. It wasn't because we couldn't until we learned a bit more about agriculture and we started to keep animals in a pen and go, whenever we need to, we're going to fatten this cow up or the sheep up and we're going to kill it. And we're going to eat it. It's going to feed us for a decent period of time. So in one sense, yes, intermittent fasting are correct. Yeah, you're right. We couldn't eat much, but that's not to say that's not the same as to say there's not a better way of doing it. If I want to optimize muscle protein synthesis, or I want to be in a net positive versus muscle protein breakdown, consuming more protein consistently throughout the day will give me a better shot of that. So why wouldn't I consume 5 evenly spaced meals throughout the day? So how do we do this with our diet? 3 practical takeaways. We're going to look at protein, fat, and carbohydrates being our body's main macronutrients, where protein is really there to be able to preserve mass and build muscle tissue. It also helps with increasing satiety. Somewhere around the 1.6 grams to 2.2 grams per kilogram is a range that I like to sit in. You can sit lower, you can sit a little bit higher. There's kind of a point of diminishing returns when it comes to protein. Like more is not always better. You kind of need a certain amount, and anything more than that, the returns are very, very, very minor. It's pointless just putting it there. You could use it to your energy sources. Fat, really multiple different things that fat does, but hormone production is going to be one of them, especially when you're trying to be in a deficit. Making sure that your hormones or your chemical messengers are firing at all cylinders or as much as they possibly can is a good idea. I like somewhere between 0.6 grams and 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. And then carbohydrates really are going to be your primary training fuel. And I will just fill the rest of my calories in with that. So that's diet. Hopefully we've got a little bit of understanding about why it's so important. The 2 other things we're going to touch on are training, sleep, and recovery. Training. There's 3 main things that training does for us. Really, the whole point in training is to elicit an adaptation. That's the point. Depending on what sport you're in or what you're trying to achieve, we still need to elicit some kind of adaptation. So if you are training for a marathon, then your running is going to elicit the adaptation. If you're training for a bodybuilding show, then lifting weights is going to elicit an adaptation. Now, the important thing to remember is that in order to be able to build muscle tissue, we need sufficient external load, and we need to be training pretty fucking hard to allow the body to want to or need to change. If we don't do that, you ain't going to grow. So cardio is great, conditioning is great, but I'll touch on that in a second. That's not the point. The point of conditioning isn't to build muscle tissue. 3 things our training should do: preserve muscle tissue, increase resting metabolic rate, and improve nutrient partitioning. And essentially, very simply, nutrient partitioning is how effective or efficient our body is at taking nutrients and putting them to the areas where they need to go and being utilized and being absorbed. Just because you're consuming food, for example, doesn't mean that it is being absorbed. You can consume things. Let's use this as an example. If you go to an Indian restaurant, you eat a really fucking hot curry, you know real quick within a couple of hours that thing's going to shoot right out of you, okay? That doesn't mean it's being absorbed just because you've consumed the food. So we need to be able to consume the food, and we need to actually be able to allow our cells to be able to absorb them and do something with them. Increasing resting metabolic rate. The important thing about resting metabolic rate is that you can burn more calories at rest. Muscle is more calorically expensive than fat. You can get real fucking fat and it not take a lot of calories or a lot of energy to be able to sustain being really fat. But as it comes to being muscular, and this doesn't mean that you need to be classic Arnold or recent one, Chris Bumstead. You don't need to be gigantic, but you need a sufficient amount. And everyone's going to be a little different depending on genetics, depending on frame, depending on goals, etc. But we need a sufficient amount of muscle tissue in order to be able to burn more calories at rest. So if you like eating a lot of food, it's a good idea, even if you don't give a fuck about the training, it's a good idea to be able to build some muscle tissue because you know that your body is going to be more efficient at burning calories. That's increasing resting metabolic rate, i.e. when you're doing jack shit, your body still needs energy. And that's largely where which is for a different episode, that's largely where a lot of your energy is going to come from. Most of your energy expenditure throughout the day is going to be in your resting metabolic rate, i.e., when you're doing absolutely fuck all. So body's got a ton of things to be able to keep up with. Ton of metabolic systems, ton of organ functions, ton of brain functions, a lot of things to be able to keep up with. And preserving muscle tissue. Preserving muscle tissue is the one that I think we need to pay the most attention to because it's the one that's probably the most influential or influenced by us. And the way we do this is we lift an external load that is going to be challenging enough for us to be able to break down or create micro tears in muscle. So the body has to use the nutrients that we consume in order to build the muscle. So if you think about a tissue that looks like this, essentially we want to create little micro tears in that tissue so that our body can supply it with nutrients, and then the tears can be replaced. And we just keep doing that. We just keep chunking that process. And that's how we grow. That's how we get bigger. But it needs an external load. So you need to train with weights or some kind of load. Okay, whether that's a log in the forest or it's weights in the gym. If we go back to our marathon runner example, it's like training to elicit an adaptation. If you're a marathon runner, it still makes sense to be able to weight train because you still want really strong and supple muscle. The how is you have to train close to failure. Now, there are many different studies that suggest that 1 to 2 reps in reserve is a good idea, or 3 to 4 reps in reserve. I always, and I'll give my reasoning for this, I always suggest to people to train with 1, maybe 2 reps to failure. Now, let's define failure. Gun to head, or gun to your dog's head, someone you really fucking care about, you cannot do another rep. If I'm like, you better push another one out or I'm going to blow your head off, and you literally can't do it, that's failure. I cannot do anymore. Gun to head, end of my life, end of my puppy's life. I can't do another rep. That's complete failure. So if that's failure, we can work back from that. Okay. And a way to figure this out is not put a gun to your dog's head, although it will work, is going to the gym, pick an exercise that's quite safe to be able to perform. A leg extension is a good one, and go as hard as you can. Put your pump up music on, pick a weight, doesn't matter the weight really, and just go for it. Make it relatively heavy to make it easy. Otherwise you might do 5,000 reps, but go for it. Push as hard as you fucking can until you cannot move the pad. Looking at a leg extension, for example, and this is a full range of motion. I want this by the end of it. If you're looking, obviously, if you're just listening, you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm flicking my hand around. This is what I want. And I want you to not be able to physically move your legs from 90 degrees, or depending on where you set the pad. So you can't move the pad anymore. Just so you've got an idea of complete and utter failure. And if you've got the idea on one exercise, you don't need to do it through all of them, although it would be a good idea. You've got an idea of like, okay, I know what complete failure looks like. I can work back from that. So if you go 1 rep in reserve from that, it's going to drastically increase the likelihood you're going to build muscle tissue. You need to get fucking close to that. And if you're not getting close to that, you're training like a pussy. And we all do it, especially when we're tired or we've got kids or we've not slept well. Close to failure. Many different rep ranges are going to build muscle tissue. A 1 rep max, for example, versus a 15 rep max are going to utilize different muscle fibers. So you can grow from utilizing varying rep ranges, but by and large, we want to stick within a hypertrophy rep range, or a muscle building optimized, let's call it, rep range, which is somewhere in the 8 to 15, give or take, somewhere in the 8 to 15. So if you're putting a bulky or training around that 8 to 15 rep range, then you're increasing the likelihood that you're going to build muscle tissue. You can venture either side of that, but I would suggest trying to keep it within hypertrophy rep range to optimize your ability to be able to build muscle tissue. Here's the negatives, the downsides. If you don't do this, when you're younger, you don't give a fuck really. In your 20s, 30s, maybe 40s, depending genetically how you're predisposed to building muscle tissue or retaining tissue, you're not that bothered. But when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you really care about this. And the challenge becomes is that it's really hard to do in that stage of life. You're less likely to be able to build, not that you can't, but you're less likely to be able to build muscles. So if you're younger, I would advise getting in the gym as soon as you can to be able to build some muscle. Sarcopenia, a loss of muscle tissue, is highly likely. If you decrease muscle tissue, you're going to decrease your metabolic rate, or you can't eat as much food, which sucks because it will also increase the likelihood you gain body fat if you keep your calories the same, or you go out for a little binge, or you like a little bit of wine and you're over consuming calories. You're not in a deficit anymore. That's basically what that means. You increase the risk of cardiovascular and metabolic diseases, which should be a fucking fear factor. Things like osteoporosis, brittle bone disease are much more prevalent. You think about it this way. You get into your 70s, and people that, if your parents or grandparents are in this age, 70s, 80s, even 90s, and you're in the kitchen doing some cooking, wash some dishes, drop a little water on the floor, slip, break your hip, which is highly possible. At that age, that hip ain't gonna recover. You don't have enough tissue, energy, time, recoverability to be able to allow that hip to recover. So generally, what will happen? You get put in a home. Now, that's fucking sad. Unless you want to be in a home. I'm sure there's certain benefits. I mean, I've seen some great movies where being in a home is probably you're gonna have a good fucking time. But we want to ensure that while we can and while we're younger, that we don't get to that point. And it's all possible right now. Even if you're at that age, you can still do something about it. Last one we're going to touch on pretty quickly here is sleep and recovery. We mentioned a couple of these hormones before. Sorry, I've had this like cold for a minute now. It's pissing me off. If you lack sleep, which basically is our body's best form of recovery, if you're lacking on sleep, then your recovery is going to be impeded. This is going to increase ghrelin, i.e. hunger hormones. You're going to be hungrier more often, which will lead to greater chance of over-consuming food. Your leptin, being your satiety hormone, is decreased as well. So you're going to feel less satiated from stuff. Cortisol is going to be increased, which is our body's main stress hormone. So if that's up a lot more, you are going to be in a sympathetic state, which means that you're not in a rest and relax state, which the opposite of sympathetic is parasympathetic, which is the other side of our autonomous nervous system. If you're constantly, cortisol is going to be driven up high, adrenaline is going to be driven up high. We can start to get into adrenal fatigue and things of that nature if it's chronically up there. The challenge with anything is that, as the saying goes, that anything in moderation is okay, and there's a large trueness to that. So if cortisol is always high, sleep's going to be impacted. You're going to be more stressed out at work. You're going to be more stressed out with family, with friends. You're going to be an overall dick in general. You're always amped up. Like, I'm always fucking angry. Fatigue is going to be increased, and the likelihood that you're going to stick to your diet and your training is going to be decreased, which overall has a negative impact. So it's just this vicious cycle that occurs when sleep is not optimized. And sleep is one of those things that we abuse the most because we can kind of get away with it, at least for a period of time, especially when you're young. But it will always, always come back to drop kick you in the fucking nuts. So it makes sense to be able to get on top of it. A couple of closing thoughts here I think are important. Hormones are important, but they do not break the law of thermodynamics. Sure, it can make things harder, but it does not stop you being in an energy deficit or dropping body fat. Things may slow down a little bit, and that's largely going to be due to the behaviors, but it does not stop you losing body fat. Your metabolism is not broken, or you would literally die. Remember, metabolism is your body's ability to convert fuel into energy. If your metabolism was broken, you wouldn't be able to convert fuel into energy. So you would literally drop dead. And if you ain't dead, your metabolism ain't broken. Think about it this way. You're putting fuel in your car, but I cut the fuel pipe so that as you're filling up, the fuel cannot get into the rest of the engine. So you can't move. You're done. Car's done. See you later. Bullet to the fucking head. So if your metabolism is not broken, then it's likely you're tracking. There's something wrong, and that's okay. Is it in AA? Is it firstly it's the admittance. It's like, my name's Abi, I'm an alcoholic. My name's Abby and I don't track my food correctly. My name's Abby and I binge eat every Friday night. My name's Abby and I train like a pussy. My name's Abby and I like to sneakily have a tub of Ben and Jerry's ice cream when my kids go to bed. As long as you accept that and take 100% responsibility, you can do something about it. But if you take your power and you pass it on to other people or to other things, you can never solve that issue because there's no issue, apparently. But every time you can look at yourself and take 100% responsibility and say, I fucked up. It might not all be my fault, but it is my responsibility to be able to accept what I've done in this situation so that I can actually implement the tools, the tricks, the strategies in order to get better. I think that's okay. I think that's okay because we all fuck up. But the second that you can admit it, you can start to do something about it. I think that's a good ending to the live stream. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about how fat loss works. As I said, this is an oversimplified version because it is incredibly, incredibly complex, and you may not need to know it to such a degree. But at least now you have some strategies, some tools, some tactics to implement in order to be able to help you on your fat loss journey.